Just so you guys know, this session is going to be live streamed, so the questions will all be entered in to the hub. I can copy and paste them over to Zoom chat if that makes it easier.
That would be great because I did not join the hub.
Okay.
I was worried about creating feedback issues.
No worries.
Oh, there's Mark ready to do intros, so I will not have to step in.
Made it in plenty of time. Is there no Julie?
Howdy, Mark.
How y'all doing?
Alrighty, I'll turn it over to you guys.
Hey, Julie.
Hello, friends. How are you?
Great. I guess we're supposed to start now.
Oh, wow. So on time. And Mark is in fact wearing a jacket. That's fantastic.
The jacket on.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm Julie Kane. I'm a Chief Learning Officer at Participate. And we, Mark and I, have been given the wonderful job of introducing Don Fraser. This is a wonderful opportunity for us, actually, because Noah was the one who connected us. Hi, Noah. To Don. We met at the Badge Summit, I think some years back. And both of our organizations have been seeing the power, the collective power of communities of practice, and have really kind of come to this great place of thinking around badging, open badging, digital credentialing, and communities of practice, and really understanding kind of, I hate to say synergy, it's a horrible word sometimes, but I think it actually fits here, that they both kind of amplify each other. And I'm not going to read off the bio, but it's been just an absolute pleasure to have Don Fraser as a thought partner. He's the Education Design Lab's Chief Program Officer and sort of works with his team of education strategists to really, again, amplify the sort of thought partnership that the Education Design Lab does. And this is truly critical work. And I know, Don, I think you're going to be talking through some of the work that you do. But in terms of helping really expand access, I think it's just been clear to Mark and me, just the passion that Don brings to expanding access, inclusion, particularly where we've been working together around workforce development, thinking, and this is where I do think kind of getting back to the roots of why we all got into open badging, digital badging, credentials in the first place, really trying to kind of upend power systems, might I say, that tend to restrict access. And I know Noah has been just a passionate person in this community, always pushing everyone in that direction. And we really have a kindred spirit with Don. So again, thanking Noah for connecting us. And I think we've just really kind of expanded our abilities to kind of push this model of communities of practice, no longer top down, really trying to be bottom up, really trying to keep ourselves true to that mission. And just so happy to have the opportunity to introduce Don. And it's really, I think, an opportunity for all of us to hear someone who has been so passionate about this work through all of the facets of his career, even before coming to Education Design Lab. And they're certainly very fortunate to have you there. Mark, is there anything I've missed in terms of why Participate is so excited to be working with the Education Design Lab? Obviously, we've been super fans for a long time. So this has been a great way certainly was a great way to start 2021. I can say that for sure in this partnership that we have. Yeah. I
think you nailed it, Julie. And just to piggyback off that, Don is a wealth of knowledge, and feel very lucky to work with Don and his team, and then also to be here as part of this presentation. And I think the more that folks have questions to ask and can really kind of like pry into the brain of Don and pull out some of that great knowledge, the better off and the richer this discussion will be. So please post your questions into the chat, Noah, and myself, Julie, will keep track of them, and we'll serve those questions up for feedback for folks. But yeah, Don, take it away.
Well, thank you both. That was very gracious, and the feelings are mutual. I'm thrilled to be working with you all too, and I want to thank Noah and COLTT, everybody who's organized this summit, for the invitation. It's great to be here and to join those of you who are tuning in and care about the work that's going on here. I feel like I've parachuted in some ways to this particular conference, but looking around at the sessions, it's covering a lot of ground. I was pretty impressed. Unfortunately, I missed a session I wanted to watch on VR because I nerd out on that and have been doing some work around VR and microcreds and badges. So a lot of good stuff going on. And like I said, I'm happy to be here again today. But as Mark said, we want to make sure that the audience does have time for questions. So I'm going to go through my presentation, but at the end of the day, I hope that this can be a conversation, and we're going to try and pay attention to some questions along the way and see if we can address those as we go or save them to the end, but we'll play it by ear. So I'm going to talk a little bit really quickly about Education Design Lab, because the name itself has people wondering, like, what do you do there? They hear interesting word, design lab. What is that? Yeah, I've been at the lab since January 2015, so 6.5 years. We've been around for 7+. And when I came to the lab, I would say to people, well, we're designing education toward the future of work. And I would get a lot of quizzical looks, right, in 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, right? But now people get that. They kind of understand that tagline. And, as you can see here on the screen, we build and test new models, right? That's what we do. We're a nonprofit. We're based in Washington, D.C. We were started because we wanted to help higher education innovate rapidly. We felt that the wheels turned too slowly. They needed a process. They needed some capacity. A lot of people would say, well, that makes you consultants. We're like, yeah, we don't like that word, though. We like design and build. And the other reason is because at the end of the day, we wanted the idea, the solution to come to life. And we're not satisfied unless it does come to life. We're going to test that pilot. We're going to make sure that it's, we have learners going through, and we're going to iterate on it, improve it, scale it, right? And then put it out there for the world to learn from. So there's some green language highlighted on the screen: affordability, relevance, portability, and visibility. These are design criteria. When we build, we keep these in mind. And I would say to everybody who's tuning in, so should you be doing as well. When you think about any program, or whether it's something small, you have to think about these criteria, right? Because it's what learners need these days. And you could also see who we work with. So lots of colleges and universities. We bring employers to the table. We think they're critical for the conversation, and as co-designers. And then we're doing a lot more work in systems as well. I'll also say that we design with learners. And this is one of the things that I think makes the work that we do different. It's that we start there. That is our starting point. We want to listen to them. We want to learn from them. We want to include them in the design. We want to knock on ideas with them. And there are particular types of learners also that we care about. You can see some of those in the left side of the screen there. We refer to the term we use as new majority learners, so it's sort of a large umbrella term. And there's lots of different folks that kind of fall under that, but largely they're folks for whom higher education was not created, not designed, right? And they are working within that system and trying to negotiate that system so that they can achieve their goals. But we put them in their voices right at the center of design, and it carries throughout. So that's one of the things that we get excited about. So before I get into the subject at hand, I'm going to talk a few things that just on my mind that probably should be on your mind too. But these are kinds of things that drive my thinking, keep me up at night sometimes, and certainly have us working harder, running faster on behalf of learners. So, I don't need to, beat a dead horse here, but we know what COVID has done. And these are just a few things that have happened over the past, 16 months or so. We see college applications dropping, right, particularly for first gen, down as much as 25% over the prior year. Freshman starts for students of color down 30% at colleges. Unemployment rate is 6.7% nationwide, right? This is higher for new majority learners. So those numbers maybe have changed a little bit, but the bottom line is that, the fault lines here and the inequality is exacerbated, as we know. So it's making design that much more important for us. Undergraduate student numbers are down in all institution sectors, so 2-year, 4-year, right? They're down. We know this, right? They're tracking these numbers, and we're probably hearing stories about this all the time. More people with bachelor's degrees are going back to school to learn skilled trades. This is actually a title from an article in the Hechinger report. And this is not just adult learners who have been in the workforce for some time. These are folks who maybe graduated fairly recently from a 4-year school, and they're finding that they have to go back and get some different skills because maybe they're underemployed or they're not getting the jobs that they want. More than 60% of workers in the U.S. economy cannot work remotely. So we celebrate in many ways what we've been able to do for those of us who've had the liberty to be able to work from home, as I'm doing at this moment. But there are many people, 60% more, right, that cannot do that. And so on the one hand, we're talking about what this brave new world of remote working and working from home, but a lot of people doesn't work for them. Between 32 and 43% of employees laid off due to the pandemic will have their positions permanently cut. And this is going to force many displaced workers to return to school and to learn new skills. So again, some very telling numbers here, disturbing numbers, and these are the kinds of things that drive us, right? That make us run faster than we're already running. I don't want to be all doom and gloom over here, because there are also some nice things that are happening in the field. And if you haven't checked out this report, the big blur out of JFF, pretty recent, but they're calling on some major change, and they're zeroing in on grades 11 through 14 essentially, and talking about some of the things that need to happen for us to do a better job in, as it says here, erasing these boundaries, the chasm that exists right now between secondary and post-secondary education. And micro-credentialing is definitely one element that I believe can assist with that if designed appropriately. Okay, so now I've shared just a little bit of what's on my mind, things that are driving me and should, help drive this conversation today. I'm going to talk a little bit about credentials. Okay, credentials, right? Well, if you know what movie this is from, where I'm going with this, right? One of my faves, I can, anytime I see it, I'll just watch it and pick it up wherever it is, right? Catch Me If You Can, where, he portrays lots of different folks, and somehow, he passes the bar as a lawyer. You think about signals, think about credentials. What do they do, right? What signals what we know? Is it what we're wearing, right? Is it who we're hanging around with? Like if I've got a bunch of, in this case, back then they referred to them as stewardesses. Well, he's got to be a pilot. He's walking with a bunch of stewardesses and he's dressed as a pilot, right? But he didn't know how to fly a plane, right? Credentials are something, we're in a credentialed society. They give off signals. That's important. Maybe it's getting you backstage, at the Killer concert, another fave movie for me here. But we wear them, we carry them, we carry them in some ways, right? And when we still create new ones, right? And when we need them, they're important in our society in different ways. So credentials are certainly here to stay, and higher ed loves them, right? We carry them, we wear them. We talk about them, we distribute them. So, for the faculty members, who've got, different gowns on, these certify something, they demonstrate something, right? So So we're all about displaying this. And by the way, when I was looking for a picture, this is from CU. I had to go back a couple of seasons to get a live graduation picture, and you had snow during graduation, which was stunning to me. I was like, wait, is that right? But yes, you hear it, see it right here in this picture. I was shocked. But the bottom line is that credentialing in society is something that we're all in on, right? And we're creating more and more credentials in lots of different ways. And education is, again, we have existing credentials, but we have to think about our credential system. We have to think about the signals we want to send, and we have to think about the design of credentials a little bit differently. Go ahead, Google credential, and this is what you're going to find, right? So you get this Google definition of what a credential is: qualification, achievement, personal quality, aspect of a person's background, right? So, this is the one version of it. Depending on where you're looking, you might find another sort of similar definition, this one coming out of the World Bank, where they talk about credentials as a document, an object, a data structure that vouches for the identity of a person, right? So we're talking about identity in credentials as well. So I don't think Frank Abagnale could get away with what he did back then, today, given all the new checks and balances on identity. But it's fascinating to see where we've come, right, and where it's going. And also want to talk a little bit now about micro-credentials. Not yet a term of art. So Google it, and you don't get the same noun, how to pronounce it, and a clean definition. You get NEA's definition. I don't know how they got to the top of the list on Google, but cheers for them. But you can see a little bit from them how they talk about micro-credentials, short competency-based recognition. In my world, we've talked about it as this demonstration of discrete knowledge, skills, or abilities, right? It's something that's a targeted learning and earning experience. And micro-credentials, I think, the fascinating thing about what's happening there in Colorado is that, you all have a running start, and you've got some incredible brain trust, Noah being one of those people who are really driving a lot of the work between K-12 and now in higher ed. So I think it's exciting what's happening there already. And I know some of the initiatives that are going on. Credential as you go is taking flight. So I think there's some great things to be proud of in the state. But there's also, and what I'm here to do is encourage people to take a step back, really think about the purpose and how we're doing credentialing. The title, I talked about this idea of the academic imperative, right, around micro-credentialing. You probably have a sense of what I'm going to talk about here, right? So this is a quote that I think is pretty shocking, but it's a very trusted, well-known economist who said, to me, the issue is not will colleges be forced to close, but rather how many will close and over what time period. Will it be 500, 2,000? Will it largely happen in the next 5 years or 10 years or more? I'm not certain about the details, but the broad contours of the forthcoming changes seem pretty clear, right? I used this quote when I was in California at a presentation not too long ago, and I likened it to the big one, right? You live in California, the big one is a foregone conclusion. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And you can say that these types of shutters, and we see it all the time. It's, colleges shuttering all the time, and it's concerning. I have a friend, former college president. I picked up the phone and called her, and I said, I'm doing this presentation. I want to get your thoughts on something. I just want your like, what did this have to happen? What happened? Why are colleges closing? She said, it's not inevitable. She's not convinced that closing is the only solution. She says that we have to try to, we're trying to do what we used to do, but only a little bit better. We need to do something different. Why aren't we doing anything different? We haven't been bold enough. We haven't been creative enough or anticipatory enough. She talked about how you educate, who you educate, where you educate, right? Things that we're not thinking about on the day-to-day. She's talking about being bold about auxiliary revenue streams. So I think there's a lot of things that higher ed needs to have in its, right in its line of sight, not in the periphery. Needs to be, your daily consideration. And it doesn't matter if you're just somebody who's, it doesn't matter where you are in the infrastructure in higher ed, right? I mean, these are things that we're all feeling in different ways, and it's impacting us in different ways. So it's worth noting. As I go on here, we'll talk about the workforce for a moment. So if you think about the workforce, over here, you've got 62% of employers who are becoming more interested in skills-based hiring. What does that mean? That means less interested in the degree, more interested in the skills, right? So a clear signal to higher ed that at the end of the day, it's about what these young folks know, what skills they have, not about where they got the degree or what that degree is in. Plus, you have learners demanding more value. They want affordable, portable, work-relevant learning. Employers need workers with new and agile skill sets. If we're going to be competitive in this global economy, which is changing so rapidly, then we have to have better learners, right? People who have higher LQ, learning quotient, right? That are just hungry for learning. We have to foster that. That's part of our job. Colleges, they're beginning to unlock their degrees, right? And this is a little bit of this Credential as you go initiative. Zero in on the most important skills, pairing those with industry recognized credentials or create new credentials. One thing I didn't put in here, but which also on my mind, if you saw what Google's doing, right? They started with their IT cert, and now they're saying, hey, we can create another suite of industry credentials, recognized credentials at a $200 price point, right? So you think about the imperative here for higher education. It is threats from all different directions right now, right? And again, I believe micro-credentials can actually address those threats and create some new excitement, and also helps learners actually get through, right? And I'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. New research showing that certifications have created more equity in the workplace than degrees, even. So again, we have to think about smaller units, right? I'm not here saying the bachelor's degree is dead at all, right? I hope that people continue to strive for that degree and beyond that degree, but at the same time, we're working and living longer. So this idea that the higher ed ship sails if you don't get on it, right, is just not true. So how do we adjust accordingly? Then this is what we're talking about every day too: the future of work and learning, right? Skills are the new currency, as I mentioned. Applied micro learning, shorter bursts of learning. And we all know, right? I mean, for those of us who've gone through 2 and 4 year, the very traditional format of learning, we know what it feels like to even think about committing that type of time now, right? To learning. Not easy. It's imperative to be a discoverable learner. So again, if employers are looking for skills, how do we make sure that those learners who have skills, have credentials, can be discovered? Right. This is fascinating, and you all again in Colorado, the learning economy, the CoLab work, I think, is doing a great job of advancing that particular conversation. Setting up the infrastructure for a digital learning economy, and then of course more innovative employer and school partnerships. So this is again, this is the imperative right here, right? This is the academic imperative for getting our act together around micro credentials. Let's talk about the moral imperative. Okay, children born into our country's lowest 2 wealth groups, the bottom 40% of the US population, graduate from college at a rate of only 11.8%. So when I think about Colorado, who you serve, it's also about who you're not serving, right? And if we look at the demographics in the country, how they're changing, who we should be serving, who we should try to be serving, who we need to serve, right? And those particular groups often overpopulate some of the lower income quartiles, and that's problematic, right? We know that success has been hard for them in higher ed. 70% of jobs will require post-secondary education and training by 2027. Analysis of online job postings show that many of the fastest growing jobs are going to require a bachelor's degree by 2026. Right, so again, who's going to lose out in this scenario? We know who's going to lose out. We talk about this weave, right? This idea that there's an intersection between life, your work, and learning, right? And learning, as I just mentioned before, we're living longer, we're learning more. We need to continue to learn, right? Particularly because of the way the world of work is changing, that we need new expertise more often. So this weave, right, is suggesting that colleges need to be more responsive, right? They need to design offerings that respond to the fact that this is the reality for people, right? They're doing all these at the same time. And we have not been responsive, and I've been in education my entire professional career, so I can take a shot at it because I've sat in that seat. I've talked with the learners, I've tried to do my best, but we got to do a better job. Recently, Third Way did this survey, and they've been doing this, I think, kind of quarterly right now, talking to high school students, college, recent college students. So you can see here that the percent of students agreed with the statement, higher ed is not worth the cost to students anymore, right? So you've got this also concern around, should I even be going, right? And if you look at where those numbers are spiking, again, they're in some of the populations that need more help, that have been historically left out and excluded. So we've got problems all over the place. This is the moral imperative that we're facing as a nation. So it's time for innovation. Right now, we're going to talk a little bit about creation. And I love this particular quote from Pete Foley: "A great idea executed brilliantly and communicated in a way that is both intuitive and fully celebrates the magic of the initial concept." Right? That's innovation. And it needs to either create a new market or radically change an existing one. Right? And if we think about micro-credentials, we're kind of doing both, right? We're changing an existing structure for credentialing, but we also have to create a market for it, right? And this has been the chicken and egg. Anybody who's been doing this work for a while has been faced with these questions about, should I? Because employers aren't asking for them. So why should I bother, right? Well, because if you think it's going to help learners, then you should try, right? And you should actually be working with the other side, with employers, to be able to create that value. So let's talk about design. This is where, I love to be, right? In the muck, unpacking and really thinking about what proper design looks like. And because the folks in Colorado, you all are off and running, which is great. I admire the work of Credential as you go, but in many ways that can be very mechanical, right? Thinking about, again, how you unlock a degree, and then how you kind of chop it up in some ways and credential it as you go to give people more frequent wins. That's great, and I'm an advocate for that without question. But at the same time, are we talking to learners about this? Is that going to work? Do we know it's going to work? Are we asking them if they like it, right? These are things that we are, in some ways we know, but we're also assuming, right? So I'm going to say, please do not assume, right? If you're going to do this work, you need to go all in on strategy, then it needs to involve learners. So design thinking, it's our pedagogy here at the lab. If you know anything about design thinking, then this will be familiar to you. But I'm going to focus on one particular core tenet of design thinking, which is empathy. It's that first one on the left there, right? Establishing a deep understanding of human needs, right? And if you think about design thinking, really started in the product space. How do I build a better chair? How do I build a better desk, right? But I need to understand the human needs. So what do I need to this desk to do for me, or the seat to do for me, right? IDEO is brilliant in this regard. Steelcase, a company that, if you're in education, their furniture, they do this really well too. It's because they use design thinking as part of their process. That's why they got really slick stuff and also pretty expensive stuff. So what does it mean? Like getting in a design mindset? It means these things. It means getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. It means letting go of those traditional mental models of what we know credentials to be, right? We got to let go of that. We're not going to get there. Again, we're not going to just tinker. Can't just tinker when you're thinking about micro-credentials, right? We got to let go of the traditional model of credentials and approach micro-credentialing differently, because it's got a different purpose. Got to suspend what you know, explore what could be. You have to design without constraints. So there's a triple threat right here, right on the right side of the screen. Time, everybody's going to tell me these things, right? The hard things about designing, right? When you say, yeah, well, I just can't design without constraints because I don't have the resources or the human capital. It's hard for us to innovate. There are some policies in the way. We're not getting buy-in from leadership, or the effort's just not there, right? So these are all the things that people use as excuses for not designing properly, right? Designing without constraints. We also don't like not having constraints, right? Nobody likes to drive on this road, right? We like guardrails. Like, this is terrifying to anybody, right? The idea that I need like a wall here if I'm driving this road, right? I need some constraints. I need a guardrail. I need to keep me on the road here. But the reality is you got to take some risks, right? And when we started this work, it was a ton of risk taking, and sometimes we got laughed out of the room. But you have to have conviction, and you have to be able to forge ahead and really plow through. Two of our signature projects going on right now, and talk a little bit about some of their insights. I'm not going to read these insights here, but I'm putting them up on the screen because I want you all to know that these were early insights that have helped us develop solutions. So we're doing this work, Bridges Rural, with 5 rural community colleges participating in this, with the goal for them to be economic drivers of economic change in their communities. And we spoke with about 1,000 stakeholders very, very quickly. And you could see some of the insights that emerged. And these insights, while not earth-shattering in some ways, or you might look at them and say, that makes sense, there's a lot of data beneath every one of these insights in the form of quotes. And when you hear these things from learners, it carries that much more weight. And when you hear it over and over and over again, it carries that much more weight, right? Just putting up a theme is interesting, but not interesting enough. We've got our Community College Growth Engine Fund, another body of work we're doing with community colleges to design what we call micro pathways, which is essentially 2 or more credentials, very targeted and short in length of time, essentially. And again, talking to learners are telling us, need flexibility in format and timing, right? I need value with that, and it needs to be hands-on. There needs to be work-based experiences involved in these. I need details from the beginning, right? So they're giving us all these core data. They're helping us build something that we believe will be more impactful, not just for the learner, but also for the institution and for the employer who's on the other end saying, I can't wait for these learners to come to me. Okay, so things we know. People love incentives, right? We all love incentives. How many times have I done some things to get the extra credit card point? Do I need to buy that thing? I almost took one flight on Southwest just to get A-list, so I can, fly in the A category for the next 4 months or something like that. how many times have I purchased that extra thing at Starbucks to get, and then I get my extra drink. I'm excited. We love being rewarded. We love being acknowledged. This is human nature. And now, more than ever, we want it sooner rather than later, right? So this is also something that's happening right now that's developed, right? We've become more accustomed to getting things more quickly than we have in the past. So when we think about this, right, we know this about people. How are we addressing this in our design? Because if you think about micro-credentials, they should be addressing these things. We should be recognizing this. This is human nature. Things we have to embrace. Colleges are talent aggregators, right? Colleges don't like to think about themselves in that way, but you are building talent. You're cultivating and growing talent like a farmer who cultivates and grows crops, right? And somebody over there, the consumer, you're waiting for a harvest, right? And you're going to pay for it, right? So we have to think about it in the same way. Employers are waiting for your harvest, right? For your talent, right? So we have to think about that. We have to embrace that, because when we embrace this idea, then we ensure that we have employers at the table for our design. Designing in a vacuum is not going to work for higher education any longer. It's not a good idea. Right? We're already under the gun, and we got to change behaviors. So designing with those other critical stakeholders are going to be touching the micro-credentials, absolutely critical. Things we must do. We got to commit to creating value, right? Which, as I just said, co-designing with industry will help with that, right? But we can't give up on that. We can't say we don't know if there's going to be value. We can create the market, right? I had somebody who was working in the industry at a platform. We were talking to him in very early stages of the work, and he has all sorts of employers at his disposal. He had in essence, like an applicant tracking system. And I asked him, I said, how can we get in front of your employers? He's like, well, if you have like 5,000 badge students, that would be interesting to them. I'm like, oh, okay. So he's telling me mass matters, numbers matter. Well, we weren't there. We're in the early stages. Like, well, we're not there yet, but we still have to bring employers to the table, and we have to listen to them. We have to listen actively to them, and their needs. Let's not make assumptions. We have to listen to our learners' needs. We have to listen to faculty needs. We have to listen to all of them. We have to design with rigor and scale in mind, right? If you build and then try to build these in afterwards, that's going to be a challenge, right? And higher education likes to stand on rigor. It's one of the legs of the stool for us, right? So we got to make sure that it's rigorous, right? And that gives employers confidence, right? For those of us who've been in the badging space since the early days, when there were many participatory badges, that was problematic. We had to undo that narrative, right? We had to make sure that there was rigor. And then we think about scale, right? How do you build for scale? Finally, remembering the long game. It's not about a single micro-cred, right? It's about creating the stack, stacking towards a degree, stacking to the next capability. And it's about visibility, as I talked about earlier, making sure that anybody who owns that credential can be visible to anybody out there, third party, visible to a potential employer. So these are critical. I'm going to share this one resource here for those of you who want to do a little bit more of a deeper dive on it. How do we think about learners? What questions should we be asking? We put this out not too long ago in March, Walk in My Shoes, this actionable learner engagement framework. And it has really helped us go even further than we have been on understanding learner needs. We identify sense of growth, sense of agency, sense of belonging, these core elements. So this framework is, as I said here, I think it could be useful to you. There's some tips in there on how to use this, but it's real research out of self-determination theory. And so for those who are out there constructing, I tip my hat to you, you're doing the right thing, but you also have some critical things that you need to be thinking about to be able to do it and do it well. So, so I'm going to pause there and see if we have questions. I'm happy to to answer those, or, I don't know if I wasn't able to keep an eye on it if anything was coming in, but, I can go all day and I get excited about this. So, but I'm going to hit the pause button.
Yeah, Don, thank you so much. Amazing set of provocations to get us kicked off. And we do have some questions that came in from the audience, as well as some that Julie, Mark, and I have. But I get the first one that is an audience question is somebody who's curious about the accreditation process for micro-credentialing. Guessing it's micro in-house as they accumulate into a larger degree, question mark?
Yeah. So this is a huge one, right? So, and this is a struggle right now. We've been working with schools, and the credit non-credit is a bit of a challenge right now, and, depending on the credential, though. So, this is fertile ground. People have even approached the lab and said, "Do you want to think about kind of being that, accreditor for my?" We're like, "No, that's not, interesting to, for like 30 seconds, right?" But I think accreditation is, in some ways, going to hold us back if we're thinking about it in its traditional sense, right? I think we have to get creative here. I know, Noah, you're living this, doing it the right way too, coming out of the registrar's office, right? Because I think that's where the rubber hits the road. So yeah, I think this is a hard one, but I think you should always be thinking about how these do stack into a larger degree.
That really, I think, also piggybacks really well to something that you focused on, your talk, Don, around just definitions. And you pointed out, kind of aptly, that you can Google micro-credentials and, your first 10 hits are all going to give you 10 different definitions. And, part of accreditation is a standardization process, right? And so one of the things I wonder about is, you also spoke about the importance of skills for the future of teaching, learning, and hiring, and how important is shared meaning making when we think of these skills. That, when we're talking about things, if 100% of colleges and employers stress that critical thinking is really important, how important is it? And is it important that we mean the same thing when we say something like critical thinking?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that's been one of the challenges, right? The differences in language. So you ask an employer to define critical thinking, and it sounds incredibly different than asking a faculty member from defining critical thinking. So it is valuable. Like when we did that work specifically, it helped us land in a place that we need to be, which is, common ground, but also a little bit of give and take. Right. And there's some great work going on, like the Open Skills Network, for example, is doing amazing work right now, trying to align around syntax and meaning. But again, we can't make assumptions about it, right? Like that when we use words in higher education, as we're building our micro-credentials, that the market knows what we mean. So that's valuable work to be doing.
Julie, did you want to ask your question?
I guess that there was something interesting, Noah, or that Ariel put in around the constraints around your design process, given that's so core to the work that you do. And I guess that one comment, Noah, around constraints are supportive, that, like engineers deal with constraints, kind of those guardrails. And I guess I'm curious, with your partners, what have been effective strategies in sort of pushing through some of these blocks that you described in that slide around resources and time. And I think what you're talking about is sort of unlocking imagination. I think sometimes if you start with constraints, you're already
That's right.
You're already hemmed in.
You're limiting yourself from the onset, and you can't get some of the good ideas going. And that's like the early phase in design thinking. That's the ideation phase. It's phase 2 of the work, right? And it's just flooding the zone with ideas, and not saying like this won't work, so I'm not even going to suggest it, right? Because it will take too much time, right? Those are the types of constraints that I'm talking about, right? The ones that limit us out of the gate. And yes, we need them, right? We need constraints, but if they're an excuse, then we're not going to get where we need to go. Particularly as we're trying to break new ground, which is what micro-credentialing at this stage should be trying to do. an institution should be trying to do, right? It's like carve out a whole new path of learning and credentialing, and that's not going to be easy, right? But again, we can't use some of the excuses we tend to fall back on. We have to get the support to be able to power through that.
Yeah. And just a quick follow-up, sorry, now you made the mistake of letting so then in this terms of strategies of getting people to feel kind of free in their thinking, what are some strategies a design lab uses to kind of unlock that and get people kind of in a, I don't know, maybe it's in that disequilibrium, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's comfort with discomfort, right?
Yeah.
That I was talking about, and comfort with ambiguity, and I mean, for us, I mean, we have tools that we use for that, but also it's just like, we do some, if people have seen any pictures on our site, or you look at like what IDEO does, you see lots of stickies, right? And people stickies on the wall, right? And as opposed to a brainstorm, it's a democratic process for just putting ideas down, right? And just going heads down and saying like, hey, in 1 minute, put down as many ideas as you have, just write, right? And one idea per sticky, and then bang, bang, bang. And then you post them all up there and you look at it, right? And you look at the themes and you arrange around themes, and this is interesting. And then, and then you just, again, so you flood the zone, right? So you don't think about those constraints, you just think and you just dream. Right. And I think that's why we all got an education anyway. Like, we like to dream. We're dreamers. Right. So let's go back to that, to those roots. Right. And put them to use when we're thinking about creating something new.
Don, when we talk about dreaming, a lot of times people do want some concrete stuff. So I'm going to put you in the hot seat for a couple concrete examples, if you don't mind. Around, you spoke about, maybe some faculty are going to get uncomfortable thinking about radical change, and that some of our departments might come to this with an assumption that means a full pivot from what we're already doing. And I'm curious if you've seen instances or dream of instances where micro-credentials bring about that change in ways that are complementary to what's already in place without necessarily tearing it all down.
Yeah, I mean, I believe it's absolutely complementary. While it's new, it's not starting over, right? It's just thinking about this idea that, look, we should be acknowledging learning more frequently than we are, right? And ensuring that people have the ability to demonstrate those capabilities and show that to somebody. You're in education, you're not going to deny that. You're not going to argue with that. Right. I mean, that's a hard argument to make. Right. If you say, no, I don't think that we should care about that. Right. Like, no. And if you think about the bottom line at the end of the day, education is still not doing a great job of graduating, everybody comes in their door, right? Higher ed. And if you think about micro-credentialing as a possible way to retain students, this idea that, look, I'm going to keep going because human nature suggests that, oh, I've got a win, I've got another win, and I'm actually building towards something, right? I can't see 4 years out, right? I can't get there. It feels too far out for me, right? If life gets in the way, I can still show somebody on a resume that I got some skills, right? I'm not going to write down that I stopped out of college on my resume, right? So you got to, there's a little bit of that argument, but yeah, we have certainly, every room we're in, there are always people who are not there yet. And that's okay, right? And that's actually a helpful voice to have in the room, right? You want people who are saying, yeah, we got to do, but you need some people who are saying, yeah, but what if, or what is this going to do for this, right? Or, so you need both sides of the conversation here. But at the end of the day, you recognize that moves have to be made, right? It's dire. It's like, and I think if you don't recognize that, then you've got a problem. Like, all the signs of stuff I showed, and this is only a fraction of what's out there. You got to wake up and see, like, we have to operate differently, period.
Don, just to kind of follow up on Noah's theme of concreteness and maybe one up him a little bit. As a former high school teacher and adjunct, I would love just to scratch the surface a little bit deeper about the comment you made about with regards to blurring the boundaries between high school and higher ed,
Mm.
and what you think that looks like.
Well, certainly. I mean, when we started this work, there's a number of us who started in K-12, so we've always been thinking about how do we go backwards. I don't know if that's swimming up or downstream, but that whatever that direction is, right? Like, how do we go there, right? Because we do believe that given all the learning and doing that young folks have, I mean, there's groups like LRNG that have been talking about this for a long time. Credentialing and giving credit for the learning and doing that happens outside of the classroom, right? Young folks are doing that all the time, right? And they don't have anything to show for it, right? Noah knows this well, right? And it's also a way to be able to unlock opportunities, right? So young folks, they love incentives too, right? So I believe that when I think about this, where we've got this opportunity, it's both in credentialing earlier. I mean, certain people will dole out AP credits. Yeah, great. And that shortens, like, you come here and I could give you a bunch of credits because you took an AP course and passed the test, got a 4 or 5, right? Like, who's passing 4 or 5s? Like, look at the demographics of who's doing that, taking that expensive test and actually getting a 4 or 5. Do they actually need, do those folks really need that, right? Like, if we think about who needs credit, it's not them, right? But we happily give that away, right? So we have to think about how we can give credit in many ways to folks who've been doing some amazing things, like, taking care of my family, right? The skills I've built doing that. So there's many opportunities there. And again, it's like dual enrollment. We know that typically when students come in the door with credits, they're more likely to persist. So micro-credentialing could help in that regard.
We do have time for one final quick question with you, Don, our final 3 minutes together. And I think what you teed up there, in speaking about, almost hearing you talk about kind of credentialing for lived experiences, that learning achieving is not confined to 4 walls and 2 bells. But also talking about, you mentioned who needs this most. And, for a critical kind of audience member who says, well, are we really just substituting one, privileging one group over another group, just changing who the groups are? And so, to that kind of critical kind of thought partner, what might you kind of respond with that maybe gets this to a place of more being what's good for them is actually good for all of us?
All students. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm zeroing in because that's what we do at the lab. We zero in on particular populations that have been excluded. But when you think about designing for the margins, right, and the people who are on the exterior, typically if you can design and it actually works for those folks, the chances it's going to work for everybody is pretty good. And at the end of the day, all learners need to benefit from this, right? I mean, I don't care where you come from or what income quartile, right? Like, you should be acknowledged for what you learned and done. And we're in this day and age where, so many other things that they do are, whether it's in social media, getting acknowledged for that. Look at people who have become influencers, right? If you're into it, and I don't know too much about it, right, but I know enough to be dangerous. Look at like how TikTok, people who create and do TikTok live actually earn money, right? It's like crazy, right? Like anybody can, but the system is set up is very interesting, right? Like, it's very interesting. So there are lots of things that students, young folks of all demographics are doing and living every day where the structures actually acknowledge what their achievements. Yet in education, we're not doing it. So that's where we have to get on board.
Fantastic. Just looking at folks here on the panel, any final thoughts? I think we're coming out here at 3:55 Eastern time, sorry, 55.
Well, I want to thank, again, thank you, Noah, for the invitation. Thanks to the summit for, having me and, and getting connected to the work that's going on there. Great stuff going on in the state already. The process, the hard work, we know that's difficult. But I commend people for trying, and because we have to try, and there's some, I think promise ahead and some wind at our back. So I'm excited about where it's all going.
Yeah, I would end there. I mean, it seems just in the last decade or more of doing this, I think it has finally gathered a lot of steam. And so I think it's, again, keeping those systems open and visible to everyone. And I think just echoing Noah's comment about all learners and just, keeping that systems design in front of our, in front. Yeah. But thanks. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you, Don. Thank you, Colt. Thank you, Noah. Thanks, Julie.
Yeah, thanks, Colt.
Thanks,
Yeah.
everybody that joined us today.
Yep. Thanks,
Yep.
everybody.
Thanks all.
Yeah.
So long.